Before we get on to the question in the next section of public sector pay, where do you stand on the prudence question? Some people saying, look, with the uncertainty of Brexit, with the uncertainty of our corporate tax regime, that we should actually start running current budget surpluses, we should hold back and be more prudent. Seamus Coffey, others, what's your feeling on that?
I would never be apologetic for being a fiscal conservative. I think you should run a tight ship. It should be well managed. I think the kind of profligacy that is often put forward by all people who are elected representatives or work for lobbyists.
Looking for votes.
Well, in Budget Week, they're all spoofers to me. I don't believe anything any of them say. But something that you did say is that corporation tax is up. Don't forget that debt servicing costs are also down by $3 billion. And yet somehow, in one of the best financial situations we've had in decades, we're still going to have to borrow to keep the show on the road. Like, let me put it this way. A squirrel is not a bright creature. They're not. But they even have enough common sense to put a few nuts aside for winter. And yet no one here seems to get that. And yet a rodent that lives in a tree understands this.
But that's
not a fair comparison. It is an absolutely fair comparison.
The squirrel is smart.
Unless you're being...
We've advocated for the rainy day fund.
There is no comparison between a household...
A squirrel is smarter than what we have in government.
Yeah, well, I mean, taking lectures from somebody that was previously involved with another political party, but anyway, we have...
Will you just repeat that bit? Because may I just add that he's referring to a party named Renew, for which I was nothing to do with them. I was an ethics officer, which is an oversight role.
Okay.
You could actually do with that in your party. Now, that's up to you what you do in your own
The central point is that squirrels are smarter than cabinet ministers.
All of a sudden, people get very shirty.
Why wouldn't I? Squirrels are smarter than you. Explain why.
The issue that I wanted to get back to before the interruption was we have actually made provision for a rainy day fund. We don't want to get to a situation again where the country is driven over the edge by, policies like what Pierce is advocating, €2.5 billion extra of taxes on FDIs, taxes on people that work.
The rainy day fund is pretty small beer now in the
it's not going to be in any way sufficient. Sorry, Minister.
It's been started for the purpose that we've outlined for, very simply, that we believe that if we allow the state to freewheel back into a situation which it was when, property prices and property taxes and everything else had us in a situation in 2011 where we were banjaxed, we don't want to be back in that situation again, and that's why we have steered a very...
Pierce, I'll put something to you, Pierce. Didn't want to go down the route that I'm going in terms of tax. So let me put one of our tax proposals to you that brings in €175 million. That would, for example, if you wanted to, you could cut the cost of childcare in half by that measure alone. It is to actually ensure that banks pay corporation tax, just some corporation tax, because for the next 20 years, I didn't interrupt you. Yeah. For the next 20 years, AIB, who are making profits in excess of €1 billion, Bank of Ireland, who are making profits of similar amounts, will not pay any corporation tax because you and the Labour Party changed the law in 2015.
And you know what the law is. And I mean, you've been playing this old record now for the last couple of years.
It's not an old record.
It is the very same. And
it's true.
It's the same old record that you take out for every single budget, and then you throw in the things like unworked farm assets, and you throw in things like...
That's a well tax.
No, sorry. We do have to take a break. We will return to this conversation.
I have answered the question.
Don't worry. We'll get a chance to return to it in just a couple of moments and go back to the issue of public versus private sector pay after the break. Welcome back. Just before we get to the issue of public versus private sector pay, Pierce, there's been a lot of talk recently, with the exception of rows over housing, that Fine Gael and Sinn Féin are getting an awful lot closer together. But what we've seen tonight now, there seems to be differences over tax. And Taoiseach Leo Varadkar had a bit of a pop-off view yesterday on Twitter. He said $2 billion in tax increases, preview of Sinn Féin in government, 60% top tax rate, VAT, stamp duty, PRSI all up, and that's just one budget. Imagine what they do in 5. Would this suggest that between that and housing, there's no chance, actually, that you will be able to go into government together after the next election?
What that tweet showed to me is just the fact that Leo Varadkar is willing to protect the elites in Irish society. It's not just Sinn Féin. For example, one of the major budget proposals that we're putting forward that brings in €750 million about intangible assets that were onshored, hundreds of billions that were onshored between the period of 2013 and 2018. The person who pointed that out and said that that loophole should be closed down is the chair of the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, the expert who was selected by the Department of Finance to carry out a study which recommended that
protecting the elite.
And the second point is that the only people who would have an increased tax rate under our proposals are the 1% who earn individual incomes above 140,000. Now, that does include Leo Varadkar, so maybe that's why he was so upset.
Patrick,
with
briefly, you're protecting the elite there, are you?
Well, what we're trying to do is protect people that are at work, and one of the things that Pierce wants to do is, go back down the road of borrowing money. I think about 300 million euros worth of borrowing, and on top of that, then
your own budget is based on 300 million euro borrowing.
You can't let him away with that.
Your own budget is based on 300 million euro borrowing.
Hold on a second now. And
on top of that,
on top of that, then pile-on taxes on top of FDI companies that are keeping thousands of people at work in Ireland, and then going after the leadership in those companies as well, the people that actually create the jobs in these companies.
Okay.
Sinn Féin's proposal is, well, let's go after them and let's make this country an unattractive place.
We're actually increasing tax credits for research and development.
You oppose everything for the last 7 years.
We did invite the other panellists in to discuss a specific issue. Dan O'Brien did some research over the weekend, Karl Deeter, and he compared public versus private sector pay here and in the UK. And the differential here is 40% in favour of the public sector, 1% in the UK, almost the same. He also outlined, since the crash, public sector pay has gone up by 3 billion and is now at 20.7 billion. All the mistakes, benchmarking, pay equality, and all the younger people getting the same pay and so on, it seems we've learned no lessons. Do you think that we are going to see all the fruits of growth going to the public sector pay again?
Well, it's very worryingly, because basically Fine Gael had a golden era for a while when they were under the cosh of the IMF and the EU Commission. And after that, they became the continuity Fianna Fáil when it came to spending on the public sector. They just don't know how to rein it in or say no. Like, if Fianna Fáil was your dad, you'd get ice cream whenever you want, breakfast, lunch and dinner, because they're not willing to say no. And I think that the politicians in this country need to say no. We're bailing out the public sector every year with massive overruns, paying the workers in it way more. And that doesn't even factor in, that 40%, it doesn't factor in their pensions, which are the best that you could ever hope for.
But yet we have a shortage of nurses. It doesn't factor in the fact you can't fire them.
We
can't get enough doctors in our hospitals.
But this is my point exactly.
Highly paid public service who need more money if they're to take up the
We
jobs.
should pay nurses and doctors more, but we should have about 25,000 less pen pushers who are wandering around preparing to get ready and staring at the sky. And there's a lot of that. Now, everyone says, oh, that doesn't represent, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the other argument, yeah, we pay for our pensions above 28,000 euro, but a lot of the workers are below that, so they're not paying for their pensions.
You've made your point. Marie, you represent the public sector workers, in a lot of cases through SIP2. Is there an issue of vested interests starting to flex their muscles again?
Well, I'm a bit puzzled as to this debate about public versus private. It's a completely contrived debate at the moment. If you actually look at the figures, which there seems to be an awful lot of opinions thrown around and very little look at the actual figures, the public sector pay bill is 10% behind where it was in 2008. So this notion that there is a runaway in the pay bill is an absolute nonsense. Now, the pensions element of the pay bill, of course, has gone up, but that's because there's quite a number of people have retired out of the public service over the last number of years. But if you look at this point in time, it is.
You mentioned the figures. Dan O'Brien says
Ivan, you asked me a question.
The average weekly earnings in the public sector is 959, and that's 40% higher than the private sector. That's these figures.
But what are we comparing here? Apples and oranges? Are you ask any a member of An Garda Síochána out there who their comparator is in the private sector. There isn't one, right? So it's an absolute nonsense to be drawing up this debate about, public versus private. Of course, the public sector average pay is going to be higher than the private for a whole variety of reasons, because the skills level. Well, but here in Ireland it is, right? And that is aside from the point. The point is, right, we had the VMT legislation, the financial emergency measures legislation, right? We're now out of that emergency. There is a process of pay restoration. The only people in the public sector... Sorry, let me finish now for a second.
Briefly, please.
The only people in the public sector who are earning more now compared with 2008 are those on 25,000 euros.
Okay, sorry, we're running out of time. But now, why are we trying to go back to what was clearly wrong? Why are we trying to restore everything to what was unfeasible in the first place?
But sorry,
hold on, I'm putting this to denial.
Yeah. I think you have to look at where you have the gaps within the service. We've discussed health. We've discussed the overspend on health, the non-delivery of healthcare to our population in so many areas. You've got a crisis in nursing, and the nursing unions tell us that there's an issue with pay. And we have evidence as plain as the nose on our faces. Nurses are leaving. There's better terms and conditions.
So should we get rid of many administrators to get more nurses to follow what Karl's suggesting?
That's just a simple throwaway. Get rid of.
Why is it simple? Isn't that the way that it works in most businesses?
Our civil and public service have to have administration. You know, we could be in here another night.
We didn't say they shouldn't have administration. The question is, how many administrators should it have?
Well, look, I mean, I can't give you that figure.
You know what, Matt? I ordered a pizza the other day, and Domino's knew more about me than the hospital know when I walk in, because they're still using paper records and it's all backwards.
If we're not going to
should make it all technology.
Can I just make the point? If we're not going to pay our civil and public service in our critical frontline areas in particular, like nurses, like our doctors, like our GPs, Ireland will be half of rural Ireland won't have GPs in 5 years' time. And there's an issue with consultants as well, and it might be popular to say that because consultants are very highly paid. There is in excess of 200 consultant posts vacant across the HSE at the moment. They can't fill them, and they're backfilling them with locums, which are costing probably 3 times more. So they are the realities that you have to face up to within the public service. If you don't pay them, you won't get them, and the system will fall down.
Thank you. After the break, Sinead O'Carroll and all the latest news today in the presidential race.